In 1962, Marilyn Monroe threatened to hold a press conference that could destroy a political dynasty. She had secrets about two of the most powerful men in America, and she was done staying silent. But 3 months after that famous birthday performance, she was dead. The official cause was suicide. Yet witnesses reported seeing strangers at her house that night, hearing broken glass, and watching someone remove files from her home. One neighbor even claimed a man arrived in a government car hours before her body was found. The question isn't whether something happened, it's who made sure no one would ever prove it. Marilyn Monroe entered the world as Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1, 1926, in Los Angeles. And from the very beginning, nothing around her felt steady. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, struggled deeply with her mind, and by 1933, doctors diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia. Norma Jean was only 7 then. Soon after, Gladys suffered a breakdown and was sent to Patton State Hospital. Just like that, her mother was gone, even though she was still alive. Norma Jean was left behind to figure out a world that never stayed still. For the next 9 years, she moved again and again. By the time she was 11, she had already lived in 11 different foster homes. Every move meant new rules, new faces, and the same quiet fear of being unwanted. There was never time to feel safe. One of the few constants was Grace McKee, her mother's best friend, who became her legal guardian. Grace cared, but she could not keep her. In September 1935, when Norma Jean was 9, Grace placed her in the Los Angeles Orphans Home Society, known as Hollygrove, at 815 North El Centro Avenue. The orphanage was considered a good place. On paper, it was clean and organized, but inside, Norma Jean felt alone. She stayed there for 2 years, until the summer of 1937. Other children teased her for being skinny and lost in her thoughts. She escaped by dreaming. Movie stars filled her mind. Big screens, bright faces, lives that looked warm and important. Those dreams slowly became a habit, something she leaned on to survive. Before Hollygrove, while living with Grace and her husband Irvin Goddard, something happened that cut even deeper. When Norma Jean was just 8 years old, Irvin sexually abused her. Years later, she wrote about it in her private journals, describing how it made her feel dirty and unlovable. She spoke about it in the 1950s to her acting coach Lee Strasberg and her therapist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, saying no one had believed her at the time. That moment changed how she saw trust, love, and safety. Even when the world smiled at her later, that feeling never fully left. At the orphanage, she learned how to survive quietly. She became obedient. She tried not to need anything. Asking for help felt dangerous. Movies became her escape. Foster families often sent her to theaters just to keep her busy, and she would sit there for hours, watching the same films again and again. She memorized faces and voices. Grace noticed her beauty early and believed it could be a shield. In 1938, when Norma Jean was 13, Grace dyed her hair platinum blonde, inspired by Jean Harlow, and told her she was going to be a star. It was the first time someone spoke her dream out loud. When Grace married again in 1942, she made a decision that would change Norma Jean's path in a blunt way. To keep her from returning to the orphanage, Grace arranged for her to marry James Doherty, a 21-year-old, when Norma Jean was only 15. The marriage became her first real escape from institutional life, but it also pushed her into adulthood before she was ready. And once she was out, she kept reaching for the next door, because she had learned what happens when there are no doors at all. By 1944, she was 18 and working at the Radio Plane Company in Burbank, California. The company made remote-controlled target drones for U.S. Army and Navy anti-aircraft training. producing over 9,400 OQ3 models. Norma Jean's job was inspecting and spraying parachutes, and she earned $20 a week. That summer, Army photographer David Conover was sent to take pictures to boost morale among women workers, and he noticed her right away. She came off shy and she had a stutter, but the camera picked up something strong underneath. Conover took her photo, and the images started moving through the right hands. Within months, she left the factory and stepped into modeling, and soon she was landing paid gigs. By late 1945, she was posing for magazines, and her factory photos began to fit the mood of the era, turning her into a face people could pin hope onto. In 1946, she signed with the Blue Book modeling agency, owned by Emmeline Snively, and the transformation became more planned. Snively trained her for 3 months, pushed her to lose what she called baby fat, and coached her into the breathy voice that would later become her signature. The changes were practical and harsh at the same time. Her hair was bleached blonde, her walk was drilled, and her image was shaped for pin-up and glamour work because the agency believed her curves and charm fit cheesecake photos. Snively's fee was $100, about $1,300 today, and Norma Jean paid it from her first modeling paycheck. The push worked fast. During her time with Blue Book, her face appeared on the covers of 33 magazines by 1946, and the name Marilyn Monroe started feeling less like a dream and more like a plan she was being trained to live inside. That same year, she also appeared as a showgirl in Earl Carroll's Review, and the pressure to look perfect tightened around her. Reports say she ate almost nothing to stay slender, and it led to health problems. She dealt with irregular periods, low energy, and early signs of fertility issues. And the strain of performing and dieting foreshadowed deeper battles later on. Stories about endometriosis and chronic pain would follow her in later years, along with grief over not being able to have children. And the body that made people stare was also a body that carried pain quietly. The attention, though, came with a darker price. Those wartime photos that lifted troop morale also pulled her closer to powerful men who treated young women as available. Monroe later described being objectified and propositioned, and accounts from that era describe unwanted advances, groping, and harassment. It fed a distrust in Hollywood's private world, and it planted something in her that later turned into a hunger for control, because she could feel how fast a career could become a trap when everyone around you thinks they own a piece of you. Even with all that, she kept trying to make the studio system work for her. On July 31, 1946, she signed her first major Hollywood contract with 20th Century Fox under the name Norma Jean Dougherty. The contract was 17 pages long and bound her to the studio for 6 months, and Fox paid her $125 per week, a standard wage for small players then. The problem was, the parts were tiny and forgettable, including a hat-check girl in Scudda-Hoo, Scudda-Hay in 1948, and the label of Dumb Blonde began forming around her because the roles were shallow. When the initial term ended, Fox did not renew it, and the contract expired on August 25, 1947. She tried elsewhere, too, including an unsuccessful screen test at Paramount. But without a studio backing her, every step felt heavy. So she looked for help and found it in 1948 with drama coach Natasha Littess. Littess pushed her through acting training, elocution lessons, and intense coaching, and she became far more than a teacher. She became a confidant, and rumors later swirled about a romantic bond, too. Their connection lasted nearly 7 years, and Littess coached Monroe on more than 20 films, often showing up on sets and clashing with directors who hated her interference. Monroe later admitted Littess helped her build technique and confidence, but the relationship also created dependency and tension. And by 1956, Monroe cut ties, trying to stand on her own. In the gaps between contracts, money kept running out, and survival kept pushing her toward choices she did not love. After being dropped, she supported herself through modeling and nude photo shoots. On May 27, 1949, she posed nude for photographer Tom Kelly at Kelly Studios in Los Angeles. He paid her $50 for the session, about $500 in today's money, and she signed the release as Mona Monroe to protect her screen identity. The photos were meant for the Golden Dreams calendar, but the story did not end there. 4 years later, in December 1953, Hugh Hefner paid $500 to a calendar company to use those same images for the first issue of Playboy. She never gave direct consent to the magazine use, yet the issue reportedly sold 50,000 copies instantly, launching Playboy and locking her even deeper into the image the world wanted. The scandal followed her, and it hurt, but it also made her impossible to ignore. By 1952, when the pictures resurfaced during promotion for Don't Bother to Knock, the attention forced Fox to sign her again, and it came at a personal cost because her privacy was gone and the pressure on her mind only grew. Marilyn Monroe walked into All About Eve, 1950, with a role so small it could have vanished in the crowd. She played Miss Caswell, had only a handful of lines, and still found a way to make the room look at her. She delivered those words with that breathless mix of innocence and hunger, like she was acting and asking for a chance at the same time. Then she pushed it further. She had lived a joke that made the whole set laugh. What if someone's name is Butler? And even the legends around her noticed. The scene was filmed at San Francisco's Curran Theater, and the pressure hit her hard. She was so nervous acting beside Hollywood giants that she reportedly vomited off stage before filming her brief moment. Yet right after that, she stepped out and did the thing that mattered. George Sanders, who played Addison DeWitt, later said she was humble and curious, the kind of person who would sit quietly reading Rainer Maria Rilke's letters to a young poet between takes. That mix of fear and focus made studio head Darryl F. Zanuck pay attention, and he signed her to a 7-year contract. It was the first real click of a door opening, and once a door opens in Hollywood, another one either slams or swings wider. The Asphalt Jungle, 1950, almost slammed shut before she even walked through it. Director John Huston first dismissed her for the role of Angela Finlay. Then he watched her leave his office and changed his mind in a way that sounded like a movie line itself, saying, "She's one of the few actresses who could make an entrance by leaving the room." The role had been meant for Lola Albright, but when she became unavailable, Monroe was called in. Critics doubted it. Some called her miscast. People kept acting like she only belonged in one box. Still, she leaned into the part and gave something instinctive and oddly real, the kind of charm that does not look rehearsed. Huston praised what she brought, and even though her screen time was limited, the impact was not. She was 24, and the film grossed over $2 million in its first year. It did not make her the star yet, but it made it harder to ignore her. Then the work got heavier. Clash by Night, 1952, put her in a different light. Not glitter, not jokes, but a fish cannery worker named Mildred, with feelings that felt too honest for comfort. She played boredom and loneliness like they were bruises you could see. The role shocked audiences because it showed raw emotion instead of polish. But while the camera was catching that vulnerability, her real life was getting messy. She was battling barbiturate addiction, starting with prescribed sleeping pills for insomnia and anxiety. And by the early 1950s, she was taking drugs like Nembutal, Seconal, and Amital, sometimes mixing them with alcohol just to quiet her own head. She even joked in interviews in a way that sounded like a cry for help. Maybe I'll plan suicide on Monday, but by Wednesday, I'll be laughing again. Critics began calling this her first serious dramatic work. Meanwhile, the spiral behind the scenes was tightening, and it would keep following her. And yet the world kept demanding the sparkle. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, 1953, arrived with that famous "diamonds are a girl's best friend" scene, drenched in pink, with a gown designed by William Travilla that turned her into a moving poster. It took days to film, and she pushed herself through the same motions again and again, reportedly rehearsing around 40 times to nail the timing and every tiny gesture. It worked. The film grossed $5.1 million at the box office and locked in her status as a major draw. The set could be chaotic, full of energy, laughs, and fast-paced musical numbers like the opening Little Girl from Little Rock, and she still held her ground, mixing charm with technical control even when her nerves tried to pull her back into hiding. That is where Jane Russell matters. People love the idea that women on set are always competing, but this story leaned the other way. During Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Russell and Monroe became close, and Russell often acted like a steady hand when Marilyn's anxiety got too loud. When Marilyn stayed in her dressing room because fear made it hard to walk out, Russell coaxed her back. She even encouraged her to attend Bible study, while Marilyn joked about introducing Russell to Freud. It was a strange little friendship, warm and real, built on laughter and quiet understanding. Russell later talked about Monroe's intelligence and her insecurity, and how it traced back to a childhood that never felt safe. On camera, they were glamour and comedy. Off camera, they were two women trying to get through long days, and one of them was quietly trying to keep the other from falling apart. Then came How to Marry a Millionaire, 1953, and Monroe played Paula Debevoise with comic timing that made the audience love her even more. The success had a price, though. The dumb blonde image got stronger, and it was something she both used and resented. The film earned $1.25 million in rentals, and her performance became iconic. But the work could be brutal. She struggled with memorizing lines and sometimes needed dozens of takes for one scene. Co-stars like Betty Grable supported her, and there were moments that showed how careful the set had to be with her. Right down to details like Grable giving her a surprise pedicure to keep her feet camera ready. Even a simple lunch scene on a penthouse terrace with champagne and hot dogs needed meticulous planning. It looked effortless on screen. It did not feel effortless to live through. So by 1954, she reached for something bigger than roles. She founded Marilyn Monroe Productions, trying to gain creative control and fight for better parts. For an actress in the 1950s, that move was bold, almost unheard of, and it instantly challenged the studio system that liked its stars obedient. But independence came with consequences. The company drew IRS scrutiny, with suspicions about creative accounting, and she faced audits, financial strain, and public legal battles. The company continued to exist for tax purposes and handled earnings and contracts, but it did not go on to produce more films. The dream of control came with stress that never really left her shoulders. And then the work turned physically punishing. River of No Return, 1954, took her to the Canadian Yukon, where harsh weather, mosquitoes, and illness dragged the glamour right out of the picture. She got sick during production. Director Otto Preminger left the project mid-shoot, and John Negulesco stepped in, building studio scenes with practical effects like wave makers and water tanks to simulate the wild river. Rumors swirled about a romance with co-star Robert Mitchum, never confirmed, but always whispered. Through all of it, she still delivered a performance people remembered, and the hardship seemed to add something to her presence. as if exhaustion itself became part of the character. Around the same time, her private life became its own storm. She married Joe DiMaggio on January 14, 1954, in a quick City Hall ceremony in San Francisco. It looked like an all-American headline, the baseball legend and the movie star. But the wants inside that marriage did not match. DiMaggio wanted quiet and privacy. Monroe wanted work, attention, and freedom. They honeymooned in Japan and Korea, and her USO show drew 30,000 fans, with chaos so intense it reportedly included riots from people trying to get close to her. The strain grew fast. Jealousy and control entered the room. Their marriage lasted 274 days, and she filed for divorce in October 1954, citing mental cruelty, saying he isolated her and gave her the cold shoulder for days. It ended quickly, but the tension did not vanish from the story. Then she reached for a different kind of love, one that looked calmer on paper. Marilyn married playwright Arthur Miller on June 29, 1956, after converting to Judaism. But the timing was dangerous. It was the McCarthy era, and association alone could turn into suspicion. Miller was investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee, and the FBI opened a file on Monroe because of her connection to him and his alleged leftist ties. They monitored her travel and friendships, even during their honeymoon in England. On top of that, journalists mocked them, with Walter Winchell calling her the darling of the left-wing intelligentsia. The pressure did not just sit outside their door, it seeped in, and for years, the surveillance turned her private life into something that felt like a public case file, making paranoia easier to understand. By 1960, the cracks were showing in a different way. During Let's Make Love, Monroe began an affair with French actor Yves Montand, and the scandal exploded because Montand was married to Simone Signoret. They spent hours together on set and off, at dinners and social events, until rumors stopped being whispers. Montand later said it happened naturally, and Miller, her husband at the time, reportedly ignored it. Maybe to avoid a fight he could not win. Signoret was humiliated in public, yet she never blamed Monroe. When filming ended, Monroe tried to rekindle the affair, but could not. The damage stayed anyway. It fed the gossip machine, and it deepened the loneliness that success could never fix. And underneath every headline was the one dream she could not buy. After divorcing Miller in 1961, she dated Frank Sinatra and was rumored to have had a brief tryst with Montgomery Clift. But the most painful part was not the men. It was motherhood. She suffered miscarriages in 1957 and 1958, both caused by endometriosis, and the losses hit her hard because she truly wanted a child. The story says DiMaggio blamed her inability to have children as part of why their marriage failed, saying he wanted kids and Marilyn could not give them. Whether he said it that simply or not, the wound was real. She carried the losses quietly, and the dream stayed unfulfilled, adding another layer to the public mystery. On May 19, 1962, Marilyn Monroe walked into Madison Square Garden like a flashbulb that refused to fade. It was President John F. Kennedy's birthday gala, and the room already felt electric. Then she appeared in a sheer, flesh-colored dress covered in rhinestones, a Jean-Louis design that people later said cost $12,000. It was so tight she could barely breathe, and it glittered with over 2,500 hand-sewn crystals. When she leaned into the microphone and delivered "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," in that soft whisper, the crowd gasped because it did not feel like a normal song. It felt like a message. That moment did not start the rumors. It only poured fuel on them. Stories had been circulating earlier, with claims that Monroe and Kennedy met at least 4 times between October 1961 and August 1962. People also pointed to Peter Lawford, who had known both worlds, Hollywood and politics, and was often described as the one who connected doors that were not supposed to touch. After Kennedy became president, the gossip got louder, and then it got darker. Some accounts claim Monroe's home was monitored, and later discussions about declassified FBI material and surveillance around Monroe and the Kennedy brothers added to the idea that she was being watched more closely than the public ever knew. Whether it was true, partly true, or exaggerated by fear, it created one constant feeling around her: pressure, the kind that tightens every day. By spring 1962, the story shifts again. After JFK reportedly grew distant, some biographers and witnesses claimed Monroe became involved with Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General and JFK's younger brother. James Spada is often cited for the idea that she was pushed from one brother to the other once JFK lost interest, and the alleged meetings were said to happen in places like the Carlisle Hotel in New York and Peter Lawford's beach house in Los Angeles. There are also memories that get repeated in this story, like Shirley MacLaine recalling seeing Monroe around both brothers at parties, with the mood changing fast when the wrong eyes were near. Now imagine what that does to a person like Marilyn. You are already the most photographed woman in the world. Every breath becomes a headline. Every friendship becomes a theory. By July 1962, some accounts say she threatened to go public, even hinting at a press conference, and one line keeps getting repeated in different versions, that it could end his career. People around the Kennedys reportedly treated that like a crisis, and later claims tied FBI and CIA concern to the idea that her words could become a national security problem. Again, some of this comes from books, some from interviews, some from files and interpretations of those files. But the pattern stays the same. The more she felt cornered, the more dangerous she seemed to powerful people, even if the danger was just her telling the truth as she saw it. And while all of that noise was building, her body was already breaking down. Long before 1962, Monroe's private life had been shaped by control, fear, and the kind of studio power that crushed women quietly. Some sources claim she went through as many as 12 abortions in the 1950s, often described as pressured or enforced by people who wanted to protect an image and avoid scandal. She reportedly told friends that fame came with a price, and that the price felt like infertility and a depression that would not lift. Other stars from that era, like Judy Garland and Dorothy Dandridge, are also often mentioned when people talk about the same ugly system, where careers mattered more than bodies. So when she tried to work, she was not just acting, she was surviving. In 1956, during Bus Stop, she chased something real through method acting, even bonding with a horse on set, as if she could calm herself by calming the animal. But the stories from that production often return to pills. Don Murray later described her as fragile and struggling, with breakdowns, missed scenes, and a drug mix meant to handle anxiety and insomnia. She would vanish for hours, come back dazed, and need help just to get through lines. People called her difficult. The truth might have been simpler. She was drowning in plain sight. Then came Some Like It Hot in 1959, the hit everyone remembers as bright and funny. It grossed over $25 million, and the final line, "Nobody's perfect," became legendary, often credited to her ad-lib in the moment. Yet behind that shine, the set was turbulent again. She missed days, she forgot lines, she leaned on medication. Some stories say she was pregnant during filming, and later suffered a miscarriage shortly after it ended, which only fed tabloid hysteria and left her devastated. Even when she won, she still lost something. By 1961, During the Misfits, things turned frightening. Accounts from that period describe chronic pain, insomnia, and dependence that had reached a point where makeup could be applied while she slept under sedatives. John Huston reportedly watched her struggle as production stopped more than once for hospital care and detox. Co-stars worried. Clark Gable was seriously ill too, and the set felt heavy, like everyone was walking through dust and heat and bad luck. Yet even then, people said her acting could still cut through everything, as if she could pull real emotion from the deepest place inside and place it on the screen. That same year, her mental health crisis became a story of its own. In February 1961, after separating from Arthur Miller, she was admitted to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Some sources say she underwent electroshock therapy 12 times under Dr. Ralph Greenson and spent about 3 weeks there. She later described it as torture, saying it erased memory and made it hard to remember lines. A 6-page letter is often mentioned, written with the kind of pain that sounds like someone begging to be understood. And still, the world kept asking her to smile. In 1962, she tried again with Something's Got to Give, and the situation turned public and brutal. In June 1962, she was fired after missing 34 days of filming due to sinus surgery and exhaustion, and 20th Century Fox sued her for $750,000. She was replaced by Lee Remick. Then the story flipped when Dean Martin reportedly refused to continue unless Monroe was rehired. Fox brought her back, partly because the spotlight would not let go, partly because the film needed her, and partly because even her chaos was valuable. But her health did not suddenly become stable. The tension stayed, the absences continued, the fear kept circling. Underneath all of it, there was also a quiet illness that shaped her life more than most people knew. She suffered from endometriosis for years, and accounts often mention major surgeries in 1957 and 1961. The pain could be unbearable. Miscarriages became part of her story. Treatments could worsen depression. Doctors reportedly recommended extreme options like a hysterectomy, and she refused because she still hoped for children. That hope, and the way it kept getting crushed, made her loneliness sharper. So when she stood at that gala on May 19, 1962, she was not just wearing crystals. She was wearing illness, heartbreak, and a career that never let her rest.